Welcome back to the Usage Report. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @BChat50. And a lot of moving and shaking and usage and playing time situations worth monitoring from Week 12 that could have some ramifications down the stretch here for fantasy football gamers. And let's jump right into things with the Baltimore Ravens backfield. As expected, Javaris Allen, or Buck Allen if you prefer, was the feature back. And he got the bulk of the work, but it's a little shocking to see that he only played 23 more snaps than recently added Terrence West. 36 snaps played for Javaris Allen, 13 for Terrence West. Allen carried the ball 12 times. West actually carried the ball 7, so not a huge gap there. And 55 rushing yards for Allen, 37 for West. The big difference came in the passing game where Allen caught a touchdown and had 4 receptions on 5 targets. He was the second most targeted member of the Baltimore Ravens, and he certainly has value in PPR leagues, has value in all leagues, but really has the most value in PPRs, where he's at this point a fringe or a RB2 there, but really more of a high-end flex and standard scoring leagues. If the Ravens are going to continue to monitor his workload as they did in this game, kind of odd. He seems like a much better option than Terrence West, but it could be just a case of the Ravens either getting West additional carries because it was against his former team, or they could be looking to keep from overloading rookie Allen here down the stretch. Either way, Allen is startable, certainly, but his floor is a little bit lower than it looked like it was going to be coming into that contest. Coming out of it, definitely not as high a floor as expected. Next up is the Chicago Bears backfield, and this was one that people were likely quite interested in seeing how it would shake out. They played in the Thanksgiving contest, and with Matt Forte back and Jeremy Langford playing really well in his absence, it was really anyone's guess how the playing time was going to shake out, and it was almost 50-50. Forte played 37 snaps. Langford played 30. The carries were distributed 15 for Forte, 12 for Langford. Langford actually piled up more yards on the ground with 48 yards compared to Forte's 44. Langford was also more targeted in the passing game with 3 targets, but he reeled in just 1 reception and dropped a couple passes. Forte caught his lone target. And you'd expect Forte to emerge as the more frequently used pass-catching back, but he wasn't effective at the goal line. Langford rushed for another touchdown, and I would expect Langford to get the bulk of the goal line work, since Forte's never really been a good goal line back anyways. He's had problems in that area of the field. They've used guys like Michael Bush in the past as goal line vultures. Expect Langford to get the goal line work. Expect Forte's value to get a bump from the passing game, but this looks like a true 50-50 committee situation here down the stretch as the Bears kind of evaluate what they have in Langford, and they're in their last year with Matt Forte. Forte's going to hit free agency. It's really hard to envision them even considering the thought of bringing him back, since Langford's looked good. Even Kadeem Carey's had some value as a backup back with running well with Langford when Langford started in Forte's absence. I guess they could lean on Forte heavily since they may want to, save some tread on the tires for Langford, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. It does seem like they're going to try and get Langford some more playing time and experience and make sure he's prepared for next year to take over as a feature back. With that being the case, if they're going to continue to split the work 50-50 and Forte is going to emerge as the primary pass-catching back and Langford the goal line back, Forte gets a slight nod in PPR formats for me in terms of who has more value. Langford actually gets the nod for me in standard scoring leagues, where the touchdowns really do carry more importance when you're not getting that full point per reception or any points per reception, and gets a slight nod over Forte there. I think they're both low-end RB2s, especially since there just aren't a lot of feature backs around the league right now. Both have explosive playmaking ability. Both have multiple avenues to scoring fantasy points. Langford in terms of picking up yardage or reaching pay dirt. And he is not exactly a terrible pass catcher. He did eclipse 100 yards receiving in one contest with Forte out. And Forte able to pile up some yardage and receptions in the passing game, and also a capable runner. So both of them do have low-end RB2 status right now. Both have upside to exceed that, and if either one went down to injury, obviously the other one would emerge as at least a high-end RB2, if not a RB1. Next up is Denver Broncos running back situation. And it seems like every week I'm checking in with these guys. C.J. Anderson, you don't need me to tell you, was an absolute beast against the New England Patriots on Sunday Night Football in the very snowy conditions. Capped the game off with a game-winning touchdown run. Was awesome, going for 113 yards on the ground, a total 4 receptions, and added some yardage through the air. Found the end zone a few times. I mean, he looked great. He looked like the back that warranted grabbing in the first round coming into the year. Ronnie Hillman, meanwhile, everybody wants to throw dirt on him and bury him. I'm not ready to do that. 14 carries for 59 yards. It's not like he was a bad back. And he's just 1 week removed from rushing for 100 yards himself against the Chicago Bears. The running game is clicking on all cylinders with Brock Osweiler under center. Both backs obviously need to be rostered in all league sizes. Anderson looking like a solid RB2 at this point, since he is the bigger back and going to get the goal line work, also the better pass catching back. But Hillman has been the hot hand at times. Anderson isn't completely out of the woods in terms of Hillman possibly getting more touches on any given week if Hillman looks good. Like I said, Hillman ran for 100 yards against the Bears just a week before, but with Brock Osweiler under center, both backs look good. Hillman looks like a flex play right now because he doesn't get the goal line work, isn't as good of a pass-catching back, and could take a backseat to Anderson. But the fact that Anderson carried the ball 15 times, Hillman carried the ball 14 times, might be plenty of touches to go around for both of these guys to have value. Next up is the Detroit Lions backfield, and this is another one that gets a lot of attention from me on the podcast. Amir Abdullah led the way in snaps with 28. Theo Riddick checked in just behind him with 26. And Joique Bell continues to inexplicably get work, and he totaled 17 snaps. And Abdullah's clearly out of the doghouse. He looks like the best running back in terms of carrying the football in this backfield situation. But Theo Riddick clearly still there as a pass-catching option, caught all 5 of his targets. And in terms of PPR value, Riddick does have some flex value there. Not really an option in standard scoring formats because he just doesn't find the end zone enough or pile up enough yardage. Abdullah has a great schedule here down the stretch. Great matchups basically right up through week 16. And that puts him on the radar as a flex or a low-end RB2 most of those weeks. And he's a guy that I highlighted in streamers and waiver wire, either the podcast or the article, whichever you checked out. Or if you haven't checked out either of those, check out both. But Abdullah's got a nice schedule down the stretch and carried the ball 16 times for 63 yards. Certainly not a great output, but again, there's just not a ton at running back available. He is fairly widely available and getting more steady touches here in an offense that's trending the right direction since Jim Bob Cooter took over as the OC. Final running back situation we're going to look at is that of the Washington Redskins. Alfred Morris played a whopping 42 snaps. Matt Jones checked in with 18. Morris was the much better back, carrying the ball 23 times for 78 yards. Jones just 8 times for 19 yards. It does warrant mentioning that Alfred Morris remains a very risky play. His offensive snap total for this past contest was actually more than he had played in his previous 3 games combined. So obviously there's risk that he's not going to continue to get a steady diet of touches and snaps. It really comes down to game flow for him. He's a guy that I would only consider starting when the Redskins are at home because Kirk Cousins is garbage on the road. If they get behind and they have to play catch-up, Morris is not the back that's going to be out there. He's not a pass-catching threat. He's the guy that's out there to salt the lead away and play ball control when it is a close game. This week, they play the Dallas Cowboys, who are giving up a ton of fantasy points to running backs. The Redskins are favored, and they are at home where Kirk Cousins is played like a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. This looks like a good week to get Alfred Morris in your flex or use him as an emergency RB2. But again, for the rest of the year, he's the only guy that I would consider using at home. You got to watch the spread. If the spread gets crazy and the Redskins are expected to have to play catch-up, that is not a week to use Alfred Morris, as he's simply not a valuable pass catcher. That's Matt Jones' job. That's Chris Thompson's job. And Morris simply won't be on the field. Moving on to the wide receivers, we're going to start with the Baltimore Ravens, and it was kind of anyone's guess what would happen in the passing attack with Matt Schaub under center, who might be his favorite target. Well, that guy was Kamar Aiken. He remains the number one in the absence of Steve Smith. He had more than twice as many targets as the next most targeted pass catcher in the offense with 10 compared to Buck Allen's 5. So like I said, doubled him up in targets. Caught 6 passes for 80 yards and a touchdown. Has a good matchup this week with the Miami Dolphins. Football Outsiders grades the Dolphins 30th defending number 1 receiver. So go ahead and fire up Kamar Aiken as a wide receiver 3 or flex. No one else in this pass catching corps is worth rostering. Crockett Gilmore's had some good games this year, but he's really hurt with the absence of Joe Flacco. So I can't advocate even rostering him at this point. Maybe you'll have some plug-and-play value if you're hurting at tight end, but can't see it right now. Aiken looks like a decent play based on matchup, at least this week. And if Schaub proves competent and continues to target him double-digit times, Aiken might emerge as a guy who you don't necessarily have to rely on matchup to start. Next up is the Indianapolis Colts, and I will be the first to say that I was wrong. I suggested sitting T.Y. Hilton in Week 12. He'd come off of a bad game where he wasn't targeted frequently by Matt Hasselbeck. Hasselbeck was spreading the ball around quite a bit, but Hilton was targeted 12 times, caught 6 passes, caught a pair of touchdowns, total 95 receiving yards, looked really good. Hasselbeck seems to have a firm control of the offense, and he's getting to air it out quite a bit more than I expected a 40-year-old signal caller to get to. Dante Moncrief was also very good. 9 targets, 8 receptions for 114 yards. Didn't find pay dirt, but didn't need to with that kind of production. No one else in the passing game really noteworthy. Tight ends didn't do a heck of a lot. Andre Johnson continues to be on the milk carton. And but at this point, T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief, even with Matt Hasselbeck under center, are every week starters at this point in everything but the shallowest of leagues. Both look like solid plays. Even if the matchup isn't great, you almost have to roll the dice with these guys because they do continue to play at a high level, even with Matt Hasselbeck in. Next up is the Miami Dolphins, and this game got out of hand very early. The Dolphins had to air the ball out frequently. Rashard Matthews left after just 3 offensive plays. He has a couple fractured ribs, probably going to miss some time. Landry remains the number 1 receiver in this offense, targeted 16 times, total 13 receptions for 165 yards and a touchdown. But the guy that caught my eye in this contest was rookie Devontae Parker, who really shined in the absence of Matthews. Played the second most offensive snaps to the receivers, 59. Was targeted 10 times, caught 4 passes for 80 yards and a touchdown. Was considered a very very skilled receiver coming out of Louisville. Has some upside and has a great matchup this week. The Baltimore Ravens are allowing the second most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So Parker stands out as a nice flex play or an emergency wide receiver 3 if you're really hurting at the position. But I like him as a flex play in standard scoring or PPR formats based on the matchup and based on the workload that he received this past week. That's not to say he's without risk, but he's a widely available player worth a look. Moving on, the Minnesota Vikings stand out next, and Stephon Diggs' production is trending the wrong way. 4 targets resulted in 4 receptions and just 31 yards this past week. No touchdowns. Hasn't scored a touchdown in 4 straight contests, and really hasn't been targeted a ton. Has bested 50 yards receiving just 1 time in that 4-game stretch. He's not an every week starter at this point. Has a tough matchup with the Seahawks this week. Yes, I know. Marcus Wheaton went for over 200 yards. Bryant and Brown were okay as well, but Teddy Bridgewater's not Big Ben, and Diggs is a guy that can probably be taken out of this contest. I mean, obviously Richard Sherman could not wait to make it a point to point out that the talk of him not being able to guard small receivers like Antonio Brown proved to be false, as he really did shut down Antonio Brown by and large in this past week's contest. Diggs may see a heavy dose of him. Even if he doesn't, it's a pretty good secondary. Don't like the matchup for Diggs. Guy who has emerged in this passing attack is Kyle Rudolph. Was targeted 10 times, caught 7 passes for 53 yards, caught a touchdown the week before. Over the last 2 weeks, he's been targeted 19 times, has caught 13 passes for 159 yards and that aforementioned touchdown. Has a great matchup with the Seahawks this week. The Seahawks are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends and just have not had an answer for them. So the increased looks for Rudolph bode well for him. Really nice DFS play this week, but also a guy who is now basically an every week start at tight end, not just a touchdown or bust type of tight end at this point. Next up is the San Francisco 49ers, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but Blaine Gabbert's playing at a semi-competent level. Not going to go overboard with the praise here, but he's not completely embarrassing himself. And Anquan Boldin has totaled exactly 93 yards in back-to-back contests. Torrey Smith remains not fantasy relevant this year, but Vance McDonald has emerged as a fringe tight end 1, caught 6 of his 7 targets this past week for 71 yards and a touchdown. He's bested 60 yards receiving in his past 2 contests, and overall in those 2 contests, he has 10 receptions on 11 targets for 136 yards and a pair of scores. Tough matchup this week, but he's getting used quite frequently, and he's really emerged in the absence of Vernon Davis, who's now in Denver. Next up is the Seahawks, who I talked about their secondary. Now I'm going to talk about their receivers. Doug Baldwin went off, caught 6 of 8 targets for 145 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jermaine Kearse added 2 more touchdowns on 4 receptions for 47 yards. All of that said, Doug Baldwin isn't suddenly a wide receiver 2. Russell Wilson is playing at a high level, though. He is hot lately. It's worth riding that hot streak out with Doug Baldwin, but let's not go crazy. He's really like a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end flex, but he's not a superstar player. Did make some big plays, but the Pittsburgh Steelers corners are terrible. Their secondary is not very good, and this is more of an aberration than a likely sign of things to come from Baldwin. Again, that said, Jimmy Graham is out for the remainder of the season with an injury, and Doug Baldwin could be leaned on even more heavily. Already the team's leading receiver, but when this team really gets going like they like to, they are still a run-first team. So let's not completely lose sight of that. Baldwin, we're starting this week in 12-team leagues or larger as a wide receiver 3 or flex based on how well that passing game is clicking. But make no bones about it, it's not a great matchup. The Minnesota Vikings have been pretty good defending wide receivers. Finally, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have most of their pass catchers in the fold. Austin Seferian-Jenkins remains out, but Mike Evans has competition for targets now, and he was actually tied with Vincent Jackson for the most team targets this past week, 10 apiece. Jackson bested him in receiving yards with 76. Jackson caught 4 passes. Evans caught 5, dropped a long pass, which seems to be an ongoing theme, drops for Mike Evans. Total 64 yards receiving. Not really that low-end wide receiver 1 that he kind of was with the volume of work he was getting before Vincent Jackson returned. Now he's more of a comfortable wide receiver 2. Maybe has some upside for high-end wide receiver 2, but that's about as good as it gets with Jackson getting some love. And second-year tight end Cameron Brate getting some love as well. Caught 5 of his 6 targets for 53 yards and a touchdown. Brate's a guy that I highlighted as a streaming option at tight end in this week's Streamers and Waiver Wire article. Has back-to-back good matchups here. Caught a touchdown pass already against the Falcons this year, who is the Buccaneers opponent this week. And then he gets the most giving defense to fantasy in terms of fantasy points to tight ends this year, facing the New Orleans Saints the following week. So Evans stock's down a little bit. Jackson looks like a wide receiver 3 flex play. Cameron Brate looks like a fringe starting tight end for the next 2 weeks at least. And if he continues to catch passes and shine as he has of late, could cement himself in the low-end tight end 1 status for the rest of the season. And that's going to wrap things up. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for all of our articles, podcasts, and our active forums. And until next week, good luck.